The Talent at TWC team has identified and invited 5 leaders in forward thinking at RIT. This is a good time to silence your cell phone. I'm going to do so myself in just a moment. There will be a Q&A period after this session, or near the end of this session, so if you do have questions, please hold them in mind, and there will be an opportunity to ask them in the second part of the program. By way of framing the way Talent at TWC has defined forward thinking, the forward thinking mindset is one that prepares for contingencies, is open to new and different ways of doing things, envisions future opportunities, and builds support for improvements. I'm going to start from the far end and just quickly introduce the panelists. Neil Hare is an associate professor of marketing. Sorry, Dr. Neil Hare.
Neil's fine.
Okay. In the E. Philip Saunders College of Business. His research and consulting activities include understanding perceptions of advertising and customer value in popular online social networks like Facebook, personal branding in virtual space, and most recently, a Cisco-sponsored global study on social media use for collaboration and innovation, looking at over 100 of the world's thought leaders operating in this space. Moving to the right, Enid Cardinal is RIT's Senior Sustainability Advisor. She is a lead accredited professional with a background in socially responsible investing and environmental policy. She previously served as director of the Office of Sustainability at Illinois State University. She worked to infuse a culture of sustainability at ISU that included a reduction of office paper use, waste reduction and food scrap composting and dining services, installation of permeable parking services, ride sharing, and an assessment of hand drying options. Ryan Raphael is Vice President for Research and Associate Provost at RIT. At the National Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado, he worked on developing and enhancing technical capabilities relevant to advancing solar energy technologies while delivering world-class quality research and development, testing, and validation. Ryan served RIT in a number of capacities from 2000 to 2009, including an appointment as the first academic director of the Golisano Institute for Sustainability. He also served as director of the Nanopower Research Lab at RIT, and we're thrilled to have him back at RIT. Moving to the right, Liz Lawley is the director of the Lab for Social Computing at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where she is also an associate professor of interactive games and media.
That needs to be updated, actually.
I hope it's still true. Your current teaching,
Full professor.
Current teaching and research interests focus on social computing technologies, including collaborative information creation and retrieval and social aspects of game design and play. Mike Johansson is a lecturer in communication at RIT. He's also a social media strategy consultant, helping businesses understand the benefits of the social web, guiding them through a plan for engagement and connecting them with service providers to establish meaningful presences. So if we could just welcome our presenters. The first question I'd like to ask each of you, if you would, share a brief anecdote or example of a time when having a forward-thinking mindset had a positive impact in your work life, or, on the other hand, and if you feel comfortable sharing, a time when failing to be forward-thinking had a negative impact in your work life. Sometimes those cautionary examples can be so helpful. So either the positive or the negative, and we can start with Neil.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm glad I get to go first because I get to talk about networks then, and the rest of you look like you might be following me if you mention the word network from here on after, so I'm pleased about that. In terms of staying forward thinking, one example of where I think I was fairly successful at thinking about the future was way back in '99 when I started my career here at RIT first time around, and I discovered the use of recorded PowerPoint presentations as a great way of sort of staving off the same boring, incessantly sort of inept question from a student about a particular problem that I was constantly being asked about. So I decided instead of answering that question about 40,000 times in my career, I'd go away and actually spend half a day recording a session on how to write research papers effectively. That was originally created in an old format. I subsequently redid that in the wonderful Adobe Connect system when I got back in 2004. And I think it's been accessed now well over 6,000 or 7,000 times. So it's saved me a hell of a lot of work, a lot of pain and suffering, and I think students really appreciate the ability to go on and look at that stuff. So if any of you are responsible for Adobe Connect, please don't ever get rid of it. I absolutely adore it, and it really helps me. But I think just putting that half a day to one side really helped in terms of getting me to think about solving problems later on in my career, and it really has saved me a lot of time, money and effort. The other way in which I try and stay forward thinking is to take full advantage of my network. I cheat. I'm not the greatest thinker in the world. I'm not the most sort of forthright and sort of trying to identify wonderful solutions to problems that people are facing. I'm surrounded by bright, young, intelligent individuals that I've had the pleasure of working with, not teaching, but working with, and stay in touch with them using Facebook. I think my only regret is that I didn't start really harvesting that network until November 2004. I lost 4 classes when I first got back. But subsequent to that, I've gone in and I've managed to find them and I've managed to add them. So I've got well over 1,000 friends now on Facebook. They seem a little happier to add me after they've graduated, by the way. I guess it's all pictures they post on a Sunday morning, that kind of thing. But that's really my competitive advantage, it really is. And I probably follow 3 or 4 people that are really exciting and that really help me think about technological solutions to problems that I'm facing.
Thank you. Enid.
Well, I think the nature of sustainability is forward thinking, so I think I'm constantly trying to survey 5, 10, 20, 30 years out just to see what to expect largely on the energy front and what types of crises that we can try and work towards averting. If it's the stick your head in the sand and haven't been forward thinking, it's completely surrounded by social media and social networking. That's something I resist. And so I have to have students do that for me because I recognize that. But one example of forward thinking that I think that really sticks out for me is in my previous job at Illinois State, I got there and looked around at the community and got a sense of what was missing in some opportunities, and people said I was crazy, but I said, I think we could get a food composting program launched here for community-wide. I think that ISU, Illinois State University, could run it out at our farm. I think we could find a hauler to do this. I think it's a new market, etc. Everyone told me I was nuts. It was never going to happen. And 3 years into my tenure there, the legislation in Illinois changed to enable food waste to be hauled separately. And grants came out from the state, so we went after grants because I had already modeled this out. I had already talked with all of the folks in the community, and so we were the first in the state of Illinois to get a community food composting program up and going because I had ignored everyone that told me I was nuts. So.
Thanks. Ryan?
I guess coming to RIT was pretty forward thinking. When I left Florida, I was at Florida Tech for a long time, very happy there, things were great. And a position opened up here and I came and visited, and I would say it's forward thinking because I didn't judge it based upon what it was at the time, but what it looked like it could become. Because when I came here, there was no research, and I was a researcher, and not much infrastructure to support research, but it looked like, wow, there's real fertile ground for growth in that place. And then, sure enough, I come, and a decade later, this place has blown up and doubled in size, and the research portfolio grew by an order of magnitude. And so that was one place where, instead of judging it on what it was, I judged it on what it could be, and that served me really well. Another time, I guess this is much more technical in my field, I was down at NASA and somebody gave me a paper. And in solar cells, we have this thing called the Shockley-Quisset, and it kind of sets the theoretical limit on how efficient a solar cell can be. You know, energy in from the sun, how much electricity you can get out, and it's kind of a hard physical limit based on the physics. But this paper was kind of an alternative way, a new paradigm in photovoltaic conversion. And I thought, now the conventional mindset would be like, nah, they're wrong, that's nonsense, you can't do that. And but I kind of looked at it with an open mind and actually ended up working in that area, writing some proposals, publishing, got way out ahead of the curve. And that served me extraordinarily well in in my career. And of course, the punchline is, of course, Shockley's Quissay limit has been smashed because of new approaches in photovoltaic conversion. The one thing I would say about not being forward thinking, and I can't think of a specific example, but I'll give you sort of a general, and you know, it's the old never say never rule. You know, you may be working on something or working with someone, and you're like, oh, well, I'm never going to work on that again, or I'll never see them again, or I'll never be back here again. And, you know, things have a way of coming back around. So I'd keep that in mind.
That's so true.
Well, you would think that it's for two people who talked about social media would be the ones who stole what I was going to talk about, but instead it's Ryan, because what I was going to talk about is the fact that I don't think I've ever actually been hired for the job that I ended up doing. And I think I have always tried to look at what's the potential for me to turn this into the job that I want to do, the kinds of things that I would like to do. You know, I was hired to teach networking classes at RIT. I don't know how I managed to convince them that I could teach a networking class, but they hired me. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to teach web development. I wanted to teach about interesting new uses of technology. And it took about 2 years, but I managed to work my way into those classes and develop the classes that I wanted to teach. And I think that always sort of thinking a couple of years out on, can I turn this into something that I want it to be? I've taken on classes that weren't necessarily the classes that I wanted to teach, thinking, can I shape this class in a different way? Can I take it in a new direction? So I think that's a really important thing. I will have to disagree with you. I think there might have been some research before you got here. You know, there was. Just saying. So that would be, for me, the thing is that always thinking, now, and I'll echo the second part of what you said as well, which is that, you know, people will tell you sometimes, you know, do some of this stuff for practice, right? Apply for a grant. Nobody gets funded on their first grant, right? So just practice, right? Except what if you do, and it wasn't a grant that you really wanted to do? That's happened to me. That was probably, you know, a mistake of thinking I knew what the outcome would be. I knew this would just be a practice thing. We'd apply for the grant, we'd get our feedback, we'd know what we were going to do. I ended up on a 3-year grant that I really wasn't that interested in working on. Yeah, we did it. But had I been more open in thinking about what the outcomes could be, I might have made a different choice on that project. So.
Well, it's interesting to me that I guess my entire life I've heard the words of my maternal grandmother, who sort of echoes through my head constantly, even though she's been gone now these 15 years. There's 3 things that have sort of guided my life, and all of you have touched on all 3 of them in different ways. And so it's sort of, I've lived my life, I guess, by being curious, being open to the possibilities of almost anything, and then connecting the dots. And I think if you do those 3 things, you become unintentionally or otherwise this Renaissance person who's just exposed to a lot of stuff. And when you start connecting the dots, things happen. So my one example would be, I'm sitting around on my couch in my apartment in New Zealand with a really busted up ankle from playing basketball, and I'll get a letter through the mail inviting me to apply for a scholarship through the organization Rotary to do graduate school in the United States. And I think, well, normally I'd look at this like, oh, what are the chances? I'm not going to do that. So what the heck? I've got a busted up ankle, get the typewriter out, start writing. 2 weeks later I get an interview, a month later I get a national interview. And then I find out, well, I didn't hear anything else. I start traveling, and before I know it, I'm half around the world, get a panic call from my mother. I'm way in the north of Scotland at a youth hostel. I get a panic call and think, oh, someone's dead. Turns out I'd gotten a scholarship to go to Syracuse University, and, you know, I've never looked back. And truthfully, I do this a lot. I don't know if this is just me. I think a lot of people do. You do the what-if game. What if I hadn't done that? What if I hadn't done that? And when you think about it, the more you think about what has happened in your past and what led you to where you are, it actually shows you where you're going to go. It makes you less unwilling to take risks. You know, what's the worst that can happen? Is anyone going to die if I try this thing that I have really not sure if it's going to do me any good, but you know, what the heck? So I guess that's, you know, leading to our forward thinking thing. For me, it's all about being willing to take a risk. being curious, being open to opportunities, and then somewhere down the road, while I'm eating breakfast, or when I first wake up in the morning, or sitting there in a parked car waiting for my daughter from her dance lesson, the dots start getting put together, and I think, wow, wouldn't that be cool? So, yeah.
Thank you. That first question might have felt a little bit like a firing line, so I want to say for the remainder of the program, however you feel moved to weigh in on any of these questions, please feel free to do so in any order. The next question that I have is, what do you feel is the next trend that is important to monitor and why?
How long are we done?
All right, I'll jump in on that because I actually read a really interesting quote about this recently. So, it was an article about the Airbnb website. How many of you are familiar with Airbnb? So Airbnb is basically, you know, a way to find bed and breakfast or guest rooms or things like this anywhere in the world in a sort of peer-to-peer environment. So I'm going to be in Santa Barbara in 12 days, not that I'm counting, and I'm going to be staying in this lovely guest house, you know, just north of Santa Barbara, $100 a night. It's a great deal. And I've been thinking a lot about the model because they're showing enormous, enormous profits. And also the people who are, you know, listing their rooms are doing quite well in this. And the article that I read said that they thought of this as sort of the third wave of what was happening with technology. That, you know, the first wave was about information, the second wave was about connecting people with each other, and the third wave is about connecting people with real world, tangible, physical experiences, right? That we're moving past the, isn't it cool that we can all talk to each other online, to the how does that then come back out around to tangible and real world experiences, which I think has a lot of relevance for educational institutions, right? There's the initial excitement of, I can take all my classes online, and then you start to realize some of the things that you're missing from being in a shared physical space with other people and some of the kinds of serendipitous things that happen with that. So I think the really interesting trend to watch right now is not the stuff that's moving online, but the stuff that's moving offline, but keeping a tether to online to improve the context.
Great. What other thoughts do people have on trends to monitor?
I've got one, and that's pissed off students. And I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I don't know how many of you have looked at the Twitter feeds recently that have hashtag RIT written on them. You might find that some of you are actually mentioned on it. And that's of huge concern to me as an educator, as an academic, and really making sure that I'm on the ball constantly in terms of what people are saying about me, my colleagues and the Institute as well, because everybody else is looking at that stuff. And students tend to act more often than not before they think through some of the consequences. Just asking our former student governor from a few years ago and things like that. And I think that to me is a dangerous trend that we need to be watching, is educating people regarding the right uses of these sorts of tools and techniques. But not only that, trying to understand the benefits and the sorts of pros that we can get from that knowledge. Understanding that RIT, campus safety and the parking and all the problems that students seem to face when they get into those sorts of issues that they get into being students, and how we respond to those to make sure they have a better experience, and then managing the negative PR that comes out of that, or facilitating the positive stuff that comes out as well.
Great.
My realm is quite different. I'm oftentimes looking at the physical world and the natural resources, so the social elements, although very important in how they interact. I mean, for me, the large talk on campus where I was talking about our climate commitment and trying to get to carbon neutrality and looking at our energy consumption, but I'm more worried about looking at the water situation, the water crises around the globe, and the price of water in so many parts of the world and parts of the country that, you know, we are blessed with the amount of water that we have, but with the crazy winter that we're having, you notice we're having less snowpack, which will influence our agriculture and everything else. So the way we're living here based on the way we use water is what I'm watching more closely. So mine's very different.
I think about that a lot too in terms of energy, obviously doing solar energy, being at the Renewable Energy Lab. And one of the things I found interesting about Liz's comments are, you know, we have all of these new tools for staying connected and at a distance, but I don't see the trend that this is resulting in less travel. It's resulting somehow in more travel, especially amongst academics and scientists and engineers. The proliferation of meetings. I mean, go to an airport. They're not hurting for business. They're hurting to stay profitable because of a lot of the issues associated with making that a sustainable form of travel. But you know, I guess right now, even with all of the gadgetry we have, there doesn't seem to be a replacement for the face-to-face communication, or to actually being in a certain local environment pertaining to what you do. One thing about what Neil said that struck me, and I've definitely seen this over my 20 plus years, when I started as a professor, it was still, yes sir, you know. They took it, you know, exactly what you said, whether it was right or wrong, and didn't question it, and were there was a respect that was demanded, and then over the course of the next couple of decades, it's almost, at a point I was like, am I teaching physicists or lawyers? Because they wanted to negotiate. Everything was negotiable. And then, of course, you know, you start seeing with the advent of the blogs and stuff, some real hostility. And I guess that's true in society. Civil discourse has kind of taken this turn for the civil. Worst. Yeah. Uncivil discourse is of the day. So that's definitely a trend I've seen. I'm not sure where I extrapolate that out to.
I just sort of jump in and sort of take Liz's idea maybe one step further. The one thing I see, not just with students but people at large, is I think there's a pendulum that goes back and forth, and I'm sort of sensing that people are searching more for meaning now than they were, say, and I'm not sure whether it's the recession, I'm not quite sure what it means, but my sense is that people are looking for the meaning of things. So sure, it is great that we can talk to a bunch of people on social networks, but what does it all mean if we don't actually do something with it? And what does it all mean if we don't actually get together and meet these people in real life? So as the students would say, IRL has become very relevant. I know these 35 people on Twitter who are in the student chapter of Public Relations Society of America. I can't wait to meet them in person at the conference in March. It's this search for meaning, and I've seen it in some of the classes I teach too. I used to sort of just make these little aside jokes about, well, this is the theory, but in the real world you'll probably want to do it this way. And what they want is they want more of that real world stuff. They want to know what it really means. I mean, sure, I can write a press release this way, and I can use this language, and what they really want to know is how to do it conversationally. They really want to make everything real, authentic, and they want it to mean something. And so this search for meaning, I think, is going to filter through, and my theory anyway is that the recession has sort of made people get away from things and status to like, what does it all mean?
This makes me think of one other piece as far as trends that I've seen is there is a general lack of personal responsibility or accountability, I think, across the board within society, but especially with our students in this generation coming up. So I'm ecstatic that you see this as an emerging trend of more search for meaning, because hopefully we'll go back to a desire to hold each other accountable, because I think that is one trend that's been very frustrating, especially with when you're trying to change behavior. It's hard when nobody tracks their behavior to anything.
Well, I think it even fits into what Neil was saying. I mean, if you do follow the Twitter feed with the hashtag RIT, you do see people venting about things that are bothering them in the minute, but you also see people trying to answer those concerns and trying to help those people. So people are starting to coalesce around this idea of helping each other. And it might be this big right now, but I have a feeling it's going to get.
Each of you has an agenda. And that's not a dirty word. You can't make positive progress without having a plan in most cases. I wonder, what strategies have you found to be effective in influencing others to be open to new ideas, in moving your ideas forward or getting buy-in, influencing people to be open to new or different ways of doing things?
Well, I'll jump in real quick on that. One class I teach, I tell them weeks 2 through 8, we're going to have a weekly creativity exercise. Whether you do it or not is your choice. But I'm telling you, if you don't do it, you're crazy, because everyone that sticks with this, practices these exercises, will find it's like riding a bike. They'll have 2 or 3 tools in their toolkit, and then when they want to solve a problem, they'll have the tools to do it. And this is for a copywriting class. And so one of the things I do is I'm a great believer in don't tell them, show them. So the quickest way I can show them that anyone can be creative is to literally get them to do an exercise. They all have to bring in an iPod. They all have to make a playlist on the iPod of the least played music in their iTunes library. Then they have to randomize it, then they have to put their earphones in, and then they have to solve a problem. And I can tell you 80% of them will be shocked how easy it is to solve the problem because the back of their brain is busy processing. They sort of know this tune, it's in their iTunes library, they put it there for a reason, they haven't heard it for a long time. And the showing rather than telling just gets them to understand that yes, you can think differently.
One of the things I saw not too long ago, I guess it's been around for a little while now, but I think it came out of Harvard. They did a study on what motivates people, especially highly educated professionals, and they found that money, there was no correlation between money and motivation. And what they found really would motivate people is independence, peer recognition. These were the really strong factors. And so like my agenda, trying to grow research at RIT, so I look at some of the mechanistic things to make it easier to get proposals out and execute on research. But the other thing I've kind of focused on is, encouraging the faculty to do it, because this is your chance to, like Liz said, pick a project that you really want to go do and go do it. Have the freedom to seek your own path. And the other thing I've focused on is actually giving people a pat on the back when they do these sorts of things and when they're successful. Done a couple of just real small things. And it's amazing the response that you get from these people when you just give them a little bit of peer recognition. Boy, it goes a long way. It's an inexpensive tool to motivate people.
And I think along with being recognized, being heard, I spend a lot of time just meeting with people and talking with people. And most of the time I'm listening because people have great ideas, but they oftentimes just feel like their voices aren't being heard, their ideas aren't being listened to. So I guess in a sense they may, when I'm listening and trying to help figure out how we can work together, they see me as another opportunity to maybe get their ideas in place and have someone listen to them. And it's amazing how much collaboration and how much support I find simply because I provide that outlet for people.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for me, I think it's the fun factor. I try and tell people, look, why don't you go and spend, sorry, were you going to say that?
Taking the things I'm going to say.
I'm glad there's 2 of us between them.
I say to people, I once made the mistake of saying this to a chamber meeting in Webster, not being terribly overly religious myself. I said to him, look, there's social media, why don't you just take, Sunday morning? What on earth Sunday mornings are invented for other than to play with new technology? So I learnt my lesson from that. Speaking largely to a Catholic audience, they reminded me afterwards, no, you should be at church first thing on Sunday. So Sunday afternoons, take an hour and just play with it. I mean, I'd say the same thing to all my students. I'm teaching a class on commercialising virtual worlds right now, and most of the little devils have never been to World of Warcraft. Likewise, they've never been to some of the furry communities that are out there and things like that. It's like, look, for an hour, get out there and see what's going on. Just experiment in some of these worlds. Be careful, obviously, in some more than others. But what have you got to lose? And then come back and tell me what you've learned. Because if nothing else, that's going to ultimately differentiate you from a graduate from Binghamton, Buffalo, Syracuse, a place that hasn't been to an institute of technology and doesn't have that techie geekiness as sort of associated with it. Go out and have some fun and try it.
But if they go to Skyrim, they're likely never to come back.
That's it.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, you've got to be careful.
So, I think a lot about motivation issues. I mean, you're right on target in the stuff that we know so much about motivation from research, and most of us don't pay any attention to it. We just keep doing the same wrong things over and over and over again. If you want a really simple introduction to motivation concepts, Daniel Pink's book, Drive, is a great, accessible introduction to it. If you want to go a little deeper, a lot of what he's got on that comes from research done here in Rochester at U of R by Edward D.C. and and Richard Ryan, which is really wonderful stuff on what motivates people and why. I've got a big sign up in my office. It's a blow up of a slide that I use in a lot of my presentations, and it's a big sheep, and above it says, "It's the autonomy, stupid." Right? It's about giving people autonomy, giving them room to do stuff. When I hire students to work on a project, I don't want code monkeys. I want people who will problem solve. Right? And most of them can and will if they're told that they have this room to explore. And also if they're told that, you know, in a big part of what we're very, very bad at, I think, in education is giving people room to fail. Right? Failure is seen as a bad thing. You're not supposed to fail. You know, you start, and even our mindset about classes, right, is that, you know, students come in, and often professors, you know, frame this in a way where it's sort of, this A is yours to lose, right? So everything you do is potentially failing, right? You were good, but now I don't think you're good anymore, right? You know, I try to flip that around in my classes. I actually use a game-based model in at least one of my classes now, and I tell them on the first day, you all have an F, you know? You start with an F. You start as a level 1 avatar with 0 experience points. Right? And all of the things you're going to do this quarter are ways that you can earn points. You will never lose a point in this class. You can only gain points. Now, in fact, I'm giving the same assignments. I'm using the same criteria for grading, but I'm flipping the rhetoric of it in a way that's really valuable, where the students are always thinking about how can I make progress, how can I gain things, instead of arguing with me about why I took something away from them. And I think for me, that's been really helpful in the way I think about my students as well. Instead of thinking about them as disappointing me, even grading the papers, I've just flipped my rubric around, right? It's not, did you do all of these things? Did you screw up on one of them? Did you screw up on 2 of them? You know, which is very often the way we think about grading. I've flipped that around and I say, you know, did you do this? Awesome, 5 points for that. Did you do this? Even better, 10 points for that. And it changes the way I think about their work, because I'm thinking about how they're gaining ground rather than how they're losing.
In the famous Edison quote, right? Someone was frustrated giving him all this money. He says, you know, have you got any results? He said, yes, I've got thousands of results, and all of them show me that it doesn't work, but I will get to the one that shows me that it does.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You mentioned Daniel Pink and his new book. What was that called? Can't remember. But what is it? Whole New Mind. That's it. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
an older book.
So is that an older book? Yes. Anyway, it'll make our provost happy because I just read it, and you know, it's like the right brain are going to take over the world. But really, it's back to that idea of meaning, and this is one of the sort of a forward-thinking, at least one person's view of what's likely to come. You know, over the last decade, you know, technology is kind of dominated, and we've seen all the .coms come and go, and this is what's kind of been the prevalent thing in people's minds. But going forward, it's not going to be the technology, it's really going to be what do people use it for, and how do we derive more meaning out of it, and it's that's where all the artistic and cultural and all of these other things are going to play a much bigger role in the future. At least that's the premise of the book. Great.
I'm sure all of you have questions that you've been holding, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for you to express them. If Jackie will help me, I'm going to use one wireless mic. If you just want to raise your hand if you have a question, we can go from one side of the room to the other.
I was thinking you must teach.
Who's going to be brave enough to ask the first question? Donna. Thank you.
So I can imagine, given your backgrounds and your successes, that you've developed quite a strong intuition about what to tune into in terms of trends and happenings. But for some others of us in the room, maybe we haven't developed that intuition yet, and I'm wondering, how do you know what to pay attention to? How do you filter out? So any criteria that you use would be most helpful.
So Neil, I'm gonna take back what Neil was saying earlier and build on that. I mean, yeah, following students is a really effective way to do it. But for me, beyond that, you know, I have a fairly broad network in Facebook, and one of the things, and actually Facebook's gotten much better about this lately, is telling me when multiple people are talking about the same thing. And it's not really interesting to me if multiple people at RIT are all talking about the same thing. What's interesting to me is when people from networks that aren't connected to each other are talking about the same thing. That's when it shoots up on my radar. When I say that, you know, you people don't know each other, you don't work in the same fields, and yet both of you have zeroed in on this news article or this technology, and that's when I start paying attention. And that only works if you broaden your network enough that you see these intersections between disparate groups. And you know, on a smaller level, it can even happen, you know, within RIT. If I see something from Neil and I see something from, you know, a colleague in a different department, I know they don't work together, but they're both paying attention to something. I think, you know, I am so dependent on my social network as my filtering mechanism. You know, and a lot of you know I have a library degree. I know how to search for stuff. I know how to filter things, right? But there's not a single algorithmic approach that I have found that is better than looking for that intersection in what disparate social networks look at.
For me, again, because my issues are quite different, I tend to follow, I'm always following international news. Beyond, I don't really pay much attention to local or national. I mean, I skim it regularly and oftentimes rely on my students for telling me what's going on locally, and I will check the last page on the reporter. I like the little text-in things. I do follow those. That's telling. But quite interesting. But more for industry, for me, I'm following, I tend to follow business trends, and I follow international news. So I'm always listening to BBC type of news, and I listen to the Spanish language newses because I speak Spanish. So I try and see what's going on globally because that's going to impact us more locally here. So I tend to look outward as opposed to on campus more.
I have 4 people that I follow on Twitter that seem to have spotted every major trend since 2006, and I'd love to be able to tell you who they are, but I'm not that stupid. But I really would encourage, I mean, and the other thing, the trick to this is not becoming bored with reading about these ideas or spotting the sorts of things that might happen, and not being afraid to get it wrong. Everyone's banging on about Google+. I'm really not interested. And I'm not interested because half of my network is saying, just another bloody social network to try and waste time in. I don't see the benefit of it. I'm not getting anything from it. And so I say to myself, okay, I'm going to park that for a little while until they all migrate to it. And then, okay, sure, then I've got time to start experimenting with it. But seriously, Sunday afternoons, if you find yourself, you know, you find something that might be interesting, take the pressure off it, or an hour at work a day, and just say, right, for that hour, I'm just going to play with this and see if it makes sense to me. It's sort of, that way it's non-confrontational. You've only invested an hour in it. You never know. You know, World of Warcraft, a wonderful place to go and waste the rest of your life, as far as I'm concerned. So be careful with that as well, of course.
I think one of the things that we've sort of lost the ability to do is that in that 3-part thing that sort of goes through my head is the connect the dots part. Too much of what's out there today connects the dots for us. Essentially, it makes us lazy. TV is great at connecting the dots for us, but that means we skip right past the be curious and get out of our comfort zone. We're just right at connect the dots. So I'm conscious all the time of trying to do the first 2 things whenever I can. If I wasn't that way, I wouldn't have come across what's a great magazine I found at an airport one time called Mental Floss. I found it like 7 or 8 years ago at an airport, and every time I see a new Mental Floss, I buy it because I always know when I finish reading that magazine, I'll have 2 new ideas buried deep in my brain that will come back and be useful at some point in the future. So being an information omnivore, I guess, is what I would say is, you know, don't be afraid to just get out of your comfort zone. Be curious. Ask somebody. Go somewhere like, this drives my wife nuts. I love this new social network called Foursquare, not because I want to tell everyone where I am, because I love the explore feature on it. So we'll be out south of Rochester in the Finger Lakes, and I'll just type in Mexican. I want to see if I can find a Mexican restaurant that I've never been to, and I figure if it's outside of Rochester, it might actually have Mexicans Preparing the food, what a concept. So that's the kind of thing that drives her nuts because she doesn't like to take chances, and I'm the risk taker. And, you know, more often than not, it works out.
Yeah, it's not a risk.
Question in the back?
You know, I think about my kids, and you know, if you have teenagers, it's amazing how viral things are. But I also think back to when I was a teenager and before we were connected electronically, how viral things were. And people have studied this. You know, they'll be like, you know, like nursery rhymes, right? The way in which they travel around the globe it's just amazing. And the things that would pop up in, you know, one corner of the United States and how quickly they would spread through all of the children. They have this non-electronic viral network, which is truly amazing. And now that it's electronic, you know, if you want to figure out, you hear something or read something about some global trend, ask your kids, because that's already old news with them, and they'll tell you like that. But I do the combination of both of those. I have, you know, there's a few of your colleagues who, if they ever ask you a question, you know it's important. You know, there's a reason why they don't ask dumb questions. And when they're asking a question about something, there's something behind it. And so that always kind of triggers me. The other thing is connecting the dots. You know, I look at weird things, and when you hear, you know, they're talking about something in the RBJ, and then I see it, you know, in some scientific magazine, and then I hear it at a cocktail party, all of a sudden it's like, okay, here are three very different groups that are all thinking about the same thing. There's got to be something to that. And
it seems like the common theme is to look outside of RIT and find those intersections and those unusual suspects. Roman.
Thanks. Mike may have partially answered this question by talking about being curious and going outside of your comfort zone, but I was thinking about what, I want to pose this to the panel and get some discussion on this. What happens if you learn of a trend that you see as unfavorable or negative? Something that maybe is even a little threatening to the things that you do and you're interested in. What if you learn that there's a trend that is potentially, I don't want to say destructive, but that could really upend the things that you've devoted your life and career to?
Maybe disruptive.
Disruptive, very good.
I would love to jump on this very quickly. My former career before here was 20 plus years working for the Gannett Company in a newspaper. Back in 2002, I became aware of this social networking, nascent kind of thing, people sharing information completely away from any money-making opportunity. And the red flag goes up. And then in 2004, we were launched a publication down here called Insider. MySpace was just starting to take off. 2005, we had to be on MySpace because people were starting to, and I'm thinking, this is all free. And anyway, isn't it great that it's free? Yeah, but you know what? I work in an industry that relies on advertising revenue. So I did what I probably should do in that situation. I tried to be the canary in the coal mine. I tried to get other people to see that we've got to figure out a way that we can be part of this or get run over by it. And you can see what's happened in newspapers. So.
I think in our world, the tough thing is when misinformation. People have ulterior motives and they have agendas, and they will start to say things that may sound true.
Greenwashing.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of times it even becomes conventional wisdom, and it's not, you know, fact-based, it's not scientifically based, and it can really impede progress, especially in some of these areas where progress is so desperately needed. Those are really hard to turn around because you're trying to, you're dealing with scientific facts that a lot of the, you know, say common people don't really have the scientific background to be able to put into the appropriate context. So they just think, oh, this is just an argument among scientists, and nobody knows what the answer is. It's like, ooh, man, that's not really the case, and but those are tough. And in my last position, I had to confront a lot of that. And, you know, science and technology is evolving so rapidly, too. Something that may actually have been true 5 minutes ago is no longer true. But you'll be combating that for a long time to come.
I think, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, going off of that, oftentimes I think of climate science and how complex that is and how easy it is to manipulate what it's said or scare people into interpreting things differently. So, I mean, the only way I can combat and people in my industry is to be able to distill the science, the scientific information, and the scientific speak into lay public understanding that is truthful and transparent. But again, that's oftentimes person by person or, you know, web page by web page or however it is. But it's challenging. But I think transparency in that instance and trying to use lay speak is the best way to combat that.
I think also there's a real risk if you try to combat things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That if you try to go head to head, yeah, everybody loses, right? There's blood and there's broken bones and, you know, nobody wins. And that, you know, some of the lessons from martial arts or from surfing or from other things where you're dealing with a large and powerful force and the answer is not to try to stop it, but to ride it, you know, to use that momentum in a positive way, to become a part of it rather than fighting against it. And even if you believe deeply that something is terribly wrong, simply saying that's wrong will almost never accomplish anything. You know, it turns out people don't really respond well to being told they're wrong. You know, faculty members probably least of all in that world, and that figuring out why people feel the thing that you know, why are people saying this, right? You can say you're wrong, or you can say, why are you saying that, you know? And trying to figure out then how you build off of that, which is easier said than done. I mean, it's very hard when you see people saying things that you believe deeply are inaccurate or damaging. But there's a reason, you know, and trying to get at the reason for that is I think, for me, the most valuable piece of it, which is, you know, great words to say, but I'm probably as guilty as anybody of not always following them.
I remember the nuclear physics community, when concerns were first coming out about nuclear power and things like that, the physicists kind of responded with, well, it's all far too complicated for you to understand, so we're not even going to waste our time trying to explain it. Which always made me think of a quote by Albert Einstein, said, if you can't explain what you're doing to a third grader, that just proves that you don't understand it as well as you thought you did. So just saying, oh, it's over your head, you know, I'm not going to deign to try, that's not a good approach either.
We have time for one more question from the audience. And I see Laura has her hand up. Well, it's better that we're on the mic because this can be captioned if the audio is captured.
I'm just wondering, how do you carve out the time in your everyday busy schedules? I mean, you all have much more pressure-filled schedules than I do in my position, and I know, like Ryan, you have children, and so how do you find the time to get through your scheduled events at RIT each day and teach your classes and work on the grant you didn't mean to get, and then still have time to carve out to look at things forward thinking? Because I really struggle with that, and usually by the time I get my kids to bed, I'm banging my head on the counter, and the last thing I want to do is open up a computer and then look at those things.
I'll start very quickly if I may. Number one, it's got to be fun, otherwise go home. That's the way I see it. If it's not fun, at the moment it becomes a chore for me, I'm not interested. And secondly, if it's not saving me time later on in life, why am I doing it anyway? We can have all these lovely lofty goals of trying to extend our knowledge and all the rest of it and keep our brains fresh and stretchy and all that good stuff. But if it's not going to save me something along the lines, if I can't use it ahead of time, then why am I dabbling in that space in the first time? So it has to be fun and it has to be worthwhile, otherwise I'm really not interested. I don't have time to waste time in those sorts of spaces that aren't going to be around 2 or 3 years from now or don't add value to me.
I've learned to use the interstitial spaces. So I do a lot of good thinking in the shower. I mean, in terms of, you've got to find time where you can just think about stuff, right? And I can't schedule that into my day. But there's time spent driving to work, you know, and I could put on the radio and listen to NPR, But then I'm not thinking, I'm just being fed stuff, right? Even if it's good stuff, you know, so I don't listen to the radio in the car. That's time when I sort of process interesting ideas and problems. You know, I get a lot of flack for the amount of time I spend carrying this around, but this is how I explore new technologies, because I can do this in the car when I'm waiting to pick up my son, right? I can do this when I'm at the pharmacy waiting to pick something up, that I've had to learn to do stuff in smaller bite-sized pieces. I have to travel a lot for work. Time on airplanes is a gift from God. You know, it is a time when nobody can reach me, nobody can talk to me, nobody can interrupt me, you know, because they can't call me, right? But I can read, I can think, you know, I can stare out the window, and there's a lot of research showing that daydreaming is critically important to creativity and, you know, making new connections with ideas. So I give myself permission to sit on the airplane and stare out the window and know that that's thinking time. And I don't watch television at all. And, you know, when I played World of Warcraft, people would say to me, and I get this line all the time, where do you find the time, right? You know, and where I find the time is the hours that I don't spend sitting in front of a television that so many other people do spend. I'm not saying that that's necessarily true of people here, but if you look at the number of hours that the average American spends watching television and you convert that into other activities, you know, I play World of Warcraft with researchers, and we talk about theory while we're killing monsters, right? You know, so it's, you got to be able to connect the pieces together where you can.
I'm with Liz. I'm a great believer in the morning shower. In fact, if you look up on YouTube, you do John Cleese, Creative Thinking. There's this wonderful short video. He's speaking to a conference in Belgium, talking about how your best ideas, you know, you literally sleep on your biggest problems, sleep on them, and make sure you've got something to write with the minute you get out of the morning shower, because you'll have the solution when you wake up. And so I find that, and I also, I like to go to the gym, and it really annoys me when the people around me don't have their headphones in, because then they want to turn the volume up on the TV, and that's really distracting. I can literally just zone out for the 25, 30 minutes I'm on the elliptical and just turn things over. And that, you can't buy that time. It's wonderful. The other thing too is the 10,000 yard stare, not the World War I kind, but the kind where and I'm so glad I have an office with a window now, because I can see the sentinel, and I'll stare at it, and then I'll try and make myself go slightly cross-eyed. And I can literally do that daydreaming thing. I can put myself into that state for 5 minutes after I've had lunch. I don't go to sleep, I just find myself staring, and whatever it is, I come out of that, and the next hour, you know, the hour after lunch can be non-productive. It's so productive, as long as I get my little bit of daydreaming in. So.
Yeah, I have to agree with most of these. First off, I don't have cable, so I don't watch TV, because I have found that I lose so much time just sitting in front of the television. It's all of a sudden it turns on and goes, and I just feel like something is sucking my brain out. So I do not have cable. I get one channel, which is Fox, so I really don't turn the TV on at all, quite frankly. But I also keep a notepad by my bed. I keep a notepad in my car, because a lot of my thinking is like that. And if you ever see me walking across campus, I'm likely off somewhere just walking, and you'd have to wave me down like this, because I'm not paying attention. I'm kind of lost in my thoughts. And I also multitask. I'll have a webinar going on that I'm half listening to while I'm responding to emails and reading an article at the same time. I don't know how that works, but it seems to.
I wouldn't presume to give anybody any advice. Insomnia works well for me.
Yeah,
Set of gin and tonics.
On that note, it's been such a privilege to listen to all of the thoughts that you've shared with us. And we'd like to thank you. We have a gift bag for each one of you. So thank you very much from all of us.
Does it have gin and tonic in it?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
It's
just mixers. And I'd like to remind all the attendees that there will be a post-assessment distributed through Clipboard, so please do fill that out. That will help us improve this program. Please, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank Thank you so
I'd
much.
like to thank you all too, because honestly, I don't think we get enough opportunities to do this.
No, we don't.
I know,
And I
I've
think we
learned a lot.
should. do
And
this
to
more.
hear from each other,
Yeah.
which is
Right.
fun, yeah.
And we'd like to thank Jeremiah for his
Yes.
wonderful